Hi everyone, Dawn here from Practical Spiritualism. Today I wanted to do a dive into the subject of boundaries, what they are and what they aren't, and why they're really important for both our personal life and our professional life. So let's jump in. So what boundaries are? I find boundaries an interesting topic. It's one that gets brought to me regularly. And I think one of the issues is we don't really have a clear definition that is agreed upon. So even if there is one in, say, the dictionary, it's not necessarily agreed upon even from psychologist to psychologist to psychiatrist. So they feel like there's not really a good, clear indication of what they are. And then nowadays within society, we think boundaries are something that they're actually not. And they tend to be more of a demand for us to do something or a command. And then when we don't do it, it creates chaos. So as we jump into this, what is a boundary? So I think the first thing that we really need to understand is that a boundary is about respect and it's about relationships. So when you look at them from that point of view, it's about creating respect for ourselves, so self-respect, and adhering to boundaries is respect for others. And on top of that, we have the relationships portion, and that's how we communicate with our boundaries. So when we communicate our boundaries clearly, kindly, then it helps cultivate deeper relationships with ourselves and deeper relationships with other people. So I think that's the first place that we really want to begin with when it comes to boundaries. The next thing that we come into is one of their importances. So why do we need to have boundaries at all? And a lot of the times people struggle to set them and don't really know why they should. They can feel something's off, but they're not totally positive of what's going on. So one of the things that I like to talk about is our energy. As a frequency facilitator, as an energy worker, this is really a big point that I like us to touch on. So if you think of yourself as a battery, and every day you're fully charged, ideally. So if we're fully charged, we have all this energy, then we get to decide where we're going to place that energy. This isn't an ideal situation. So everything that we place our energy towards depletes the power source. And so if most of us are placing our energy into the past, our traumas and dramas of our childhood, of what's happened to us, and then we take, say 50% goes backward, because we haven't done the work that needs to happen. And then we have a whole bunch going forward, but they're going into maybe what are people at work thinking about me or my kids, or what are society's rules and regulations. Maybe it's church, maybe it's a medical system, maybe it's politics. Where are you giving your energy to? Think of it like power. Who do you give your power to? And so if we give 30% more out forward, not even to mention if we're future forecasting, worrying about what's going to happen later on, then all of a sudden we're down to maybe 15 to 20% of our energy source, our battery, to create with in present time. And so part of boundaries is a way for us to call our power back, so that when we're in the day, in this moment, and we're present with ourselves, then we can start to create boundaries. This is a boundary line where if I actually adhered to this, I wouldn't be giving all of that energy to that person. So instead of cultivating attachments, we'd be cultivating connection. And connections don't take our energy. They don't deplete us. They're almost reciprocal. So it's almost like we're getting a recharge even as we go. And that's really what we want to be doing with our energy for the most part. There's always going to be levels of depletion at work, situations that we're bound to. But for the most part, this is what we're trying to create, is a way to have as much of our energy, our power source, with us at all times. So then we take a look at this. A boundary helps us maintain it and then helps us recharge it as well. So that by the end of the day, maybe we're down to 70%, but a good night's sleep, and maybe eating healthy, maybe time with loved ones, whatever it is that fills our cup is recharging our battery. And so that's how we take a look at this and the importance of boundaries when it comes to our energy source. So when we think of boundaries and why it's necessary for us to have them, one of the points of them is because they're an act of self-respect and they're an act of self-love. And so when we look at them as a form of self-care, we're caring for that energy source. When we take a look at the other side of communication and cultivating relationships, boundaries help us communicate our needs or teach our needs to other people. And so it doesn't mean that somebody's always going to adhere to our boundary. I could have a hard boundary about being yelled at and sworn at, but maybe I have somebody out in the world in a store that starts doing it. They're not going to necessarily adhere to that boundary. And because we don't have a relationship, I'm not necessarily going to communicate it. I'm simply going to do my response to that behavior and maybe walk away. Or maybe it's not safe for me to turn my back, so I'm going to hold. But when it comes to our relationships, that's when we're really cultivating boundaries. Now, that being said, I'm very well known for making very clear boundaries with complete strangers. So in my world, if you walked up to me and started yelling and swearing, I would absolutely stand my ground and call for a full stop. And then I'd give you really a warning. So it's, here's my boundaries, but I don't know you, so we're going to have a different relationship. In an ideal situation, we're going to take the step back and calm so that we can communicate our needs and so that somebody knows why we're responding the way that we are. So if we're in a relationship instead we have this issue, maybe it's our partner or our kids, maybe it's a family member, and they start getting upset and they start yelling and swearing, we can leave that situation, and when we come back, when we're calmed down, both parties, that's when we're going to have a conversation about what our needs are. Then we can sit down and say, hey, we need to talk about what happened yesterday. I'm not okay with anybody yelling and swearing at me. So in the future, when you behave like that, this is going to be my response. So I'm not reacting, I'm responding to your behavior. Laws of cause and effect. And so I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to leave the room, and then I'm going to come back in and give it another chance when we've calmed down a bit. The other party might say, are you threatening me, or are you giving me an ultimatum? No, because I can't control your behavior. That's really important. I cannot control your behavior. I can control my response to your behavior. And so I'm not leaving you, I'm not abandoning you, but what I am doing is stepping out of that because I don't agree with your behavior, and I'm going to come back in when I feel your behavior is respectful towards me. And that's a different quality of a relationship. So my communicating it is because I'm communicating that I want this relationship, and these are going to be my needs for this relationship to continue, and this is how I'm going to respond to the situation. How it keeps going if the person continues to cross your boundaries will be completely up to you, whether or not you're going to keep them in your life or not keep them in your life. And that's another whole level that we need to deep dive into about what is this going to do for my self-respect and my self-love. What is this hitting on my worthiness scale? So then the other piece that we come into is that when we look at boundaries, setting clear boundaries not only communicates our needs, but it also fosters healthier relationships and that deeper sense of self-worth. So I touched a bit on this already. We want to cultivate greater self-worth. And often we judge our self-worth by other people's behavior. But it's not actually based on other people's behavior. It's based on our own. So if I don't feel I'm worthy of being talked to and respected, why should anybody else feel that way? We can get into a whole discussion about morals and values. We'll make that another day. But on the end of this right now, what we're really getting into is that you need to cultivate your boundaries to adhere and create and cultivate your own sense of worthiness. Often what we're looking for from somebody else is what we actually need, we crave, we desire from ourselves. And we don't actually need it from somebody else. And once we give it to ourselves, we see that reflected in the relationships around us. That's the mirror work. Often another thing that we misunderstand when we say they're a mirror for us. Setting boundaries also means being honest with yourself and with others about what you can and cannot do. This is a big one for a lot of us. We want to say yes. We want to people please. Again, another subject. We want to please people and we want them to be happy with us. But we need to have those boundaries about our time and our energy. So can you really do this without creating a sense of resentment? Can you do this without doing harm to the relationship or doing harm to the relationship with yourself? So if it's a time boundary, maybe it's helping somebody move. Maybe it's Yeah, I can give you a hand, but I can give you a hand between 12 and 2. The boundary becomes on your time versus giving your whole day to a person. So we figure out where's the boundary. And the important thing about a boundary is it really is about cultivating intimacy. Into me see. Intimacy. Intimacy. So we start first with ourselves. What is it that I need with this boundary for? What is it that I require? That's how we know what a boundary is actually for, is by knowing the answer to that. Because if you don't know the answer to that, how are you possibly going to communicate that to a loved one or to a coworker? We have to go in so that we don't come out with passive aggressive behavior. And instead, we can enter into that conversation with an open heart, truly working towards cultivating intimacy now with another person. But it always starts at home first. And then the other piece about boundaries is it's not about being rigid, but it's about being true to ourselves. So often we think of a boundary and we get really rigid on it. And we forget that every moment is unique and every moment is different. I often use this when I'm teaching about the breath. Every single inhale, every single exhale is unique. You'll never have two breaths exactly the same. Even if you try to mirror on the resistance and on the length, they're still different because the cells of your body have changed. And the second breath is a body that already experienced the first breath. So the same goes with boundaries. Boundaries are going to be somewhat malleable, not in terms of respect, but maybe from situation to situation. Or maybe this is a hard boundary I have about the tone that you use with me, but I have more leniency when you're in pain or when you're suffering, whether that's emotional, mental, or physical. So there's leniencies that maybe will shift based on the situation. My recommendation would be still to communicate it. Okay, I'm going to give you a bit of leeway here because I understand you're in pain, but it's not actually a reason to talk to me with disrespect. So we still adhere to it. We still show ourselves love and respect while giving some leniency to the boundaries that we've created. Now, let's talk about what boundaries are not. I touched on them a bit. So boundaries are not commands. You're going to do it. They're not demands. I require this of you and you will. They're not ultimatums. They're not if you don't do it or else. And they're not requests. Would you please? They're about cultivating that relationship, really clear communication. They're also not rude, they're not aggressive, and they're not selfish. So that is one problem that we have within our societies. We think boundaries are being selfish. We're not just giving and giving. In terms of psychosomatic work, energy work, we see a lot of issues with people's shoulders. And we won't get into lefts and rights at the moment, but shoulders are what hold the arms. And so if you think of it this way, often shoulders will give out, whether they're injury or they simply blow out, because we're not giving and receiving in equal measure. And so if we are give, but we don't really allow ourselves to receive, then we're going to have this issue come about. So we think we're being selfish when we take, when we receive somebody else's gift. And we forget that because our life is about reciprocal, that it is receiving the gift, how good that feels to give a gift and somebody appreciate it. If you never receive from somebody else, then it's a little bit selfish because you're never allowing them to feel that gift of giving. And so the same thing goes with boundaries. They're not selfish. They're a way about cultivating really solid ground for a relationship to be built on with ourselves and again with other people. Boundaries are compassionate and they're necessary for our holistic wellness. When we think of holistic wellness, we're talking about being whole and complete. That's what it means to be holy, to be whole and complete. Holistic wellness, to look at all the aspects and layers of ourselves, not only the physical body, our environment and breath, but our mental body, our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, our light body, our subtle energies, our information that we have in our cells, and about our spirit, our soul. So it's about creating and cultivating a connection and an interplay between all those layers of ourself. And that really starts when we start to do that inner work to understand what our boundaries are and why they're required for our life, knowing that they will shift and change as well. They're not rigid, because as we do our healing work, our boundaries are going to change. I might have a certain boundary on something because when you hit it, you trigger an old wound that I have. But if I start really working on that wound, so I have an issue that I've been working through with what I thought was rejection and turns out to be ridicule and persecution. And even sharing that right now is a massive sign of vulnerability. And so I have this thing that comes forward where I get quite panicked with the idea of being ridiculed or being persecuted. It's an old childhood issue, as well as ancestral, epigenetic, and it goes through all of my layers of myself as well. And so when I look at that, if I'm not fully healing it, boundaries that I had maybe a year ago aren't even the same boundaries I have now. I'm going to respond differently to you today if you ridicule me than I would have responded to you last year. Definitely different than I would have responded to you 6 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I'm going to probably respond to you differently in 2 weeks because it's an active thing that I'm literally working on. And I have people in my life that trigger it. And I know by how I'm reacting to responding on where I am on my healing journey with that. And so the same goes with all of our boundaries. If the boundary's there to protect a wound, it's not just there about respect, but we're in protection mode, then often we'll come across more aggressively with those. And we need to cultivate a bit of a change there. That's there to let us know, there's the mirror work, like, hey, I have a wound and I need to deal with this. It doesn't mean I'm going to do it in the fire with somebody that's ridiculing me or bullying me. It means I'm going to step back out of that situation, do my work, so that maybe the next time I come across somebody like that, then I'll see how I respond to it. But I'm not going to keep putting myself in a situation that is disrespectful to me because I know that I deserve better than that. At the very least in my head, even if I can't pull it into my heart and my body yet. And so keeping that in mind as well, when how we're communicating them, am I triggered or am I responding at the moment? How do we set boundaries without feeling guilty? So this is a big one. When we feel guilty, remind ourselves that setting boundaries, we're creating healthier relationships. So note that when you're doing this, when you're putting a boundary down, we want to be really calmed and centered, ground our energy however you do that. I have my own process that I give my clients and I work with myself, but ground yourself, get centered, and then you can communicate those boundaries from a place of an open heart, knowing that no matter what happens, I'm good. You're also modeling self-respect and teaching others the same. To me, this is probably one of the most vital reasons that I do my work, is so that I model different behavior for my kids, for my family, for my friends, for my staff, than I've had necessarily modeled for me. So I have a whole set of boundaries that I place and that I teach my team, my inner circle, my wider circle, and as it ripples outward, because I want to model that behavior for them. When somebody sees you doing something and they see you doing it in a respectful and kind way, they probably even more consciously than unconsciously will start to play with it, model it, maybe in privacy at home, maybe they'll do it with a couple friends, and then it'll grow and get bigger. I always say hurt people. So there's either love or there's fear. If we're coming from a place of fear, we become lost, we're hurting, and that stunts our development. As we do our healing work, healed people inspire people to heal. And so the more that we do this work, the more we inspire change in the world around us. And we start at home. We start with ourselves and it ripples out from there. Be clear and direct. So we want to make sure that when we're doing this, to not have guilt is using clarity and directness and compassion. And we're here with an open heart. There's no reason to feel guilt when the energy that you're sending out is love, kindness, and respect. Often guilt comes because we feel or think we're doing something wrong. When we're grounded and centered, we know that we're coming from a place of love, then we're moving closer to ourselves versus fear, where we're moving further away from ourselves. And then start small. Practice with saying no. No is a complete sentence. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to qualify it. When I had to practice this, because I was so not good at it, I started with grocery stores. I'd get to the teller, they'd ask me, would you like a bag with that? And I would smile and say, no. And it was hard at first to not say thank you, or I have a bag in the car, or anything else. But I was starting to teach myself that I had the worth and the respect to just be like, no, it's not rude. It's all about the tone and the way we say it. From there, I usually end up talking with all the people in the lineup and the cashier that knows a complete sentence, and it's totally okay for us to say it with kindness and love. So I don't need to qualify it. Everybody ends up laughing, we joke, it becomes a conversation, and we're beginning to make that ripple effect again. We're modeling a new behavior. So start small, in a place where it doesn't matter necessarily what they think of you. Or maybe you need to learn to not let what their thoughts are of you matter. So that would be a place that we can start from. So I would just want to remind you guys to remember to be your own healer. That every step you take is a step towards empowerment. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need it. And don't forget to subscribe for more insights and inspiration, not only to this YouTube page, but also to my social media, as well as my blog on practicalspiritualismco.com. Leave a comment below about your own experiences and any questions that you have. I'd love to hear from you. Questions that you have, if you DM me, I will do future videos on them. I love to have that interplay and topic to start from. And that is all for me. So I see the light in you, and it is brilliant. Until next time, stay bold, stay loving, and keep embracing your journey. Brightest of blessings, my friends. Bye for now.